Is Mornye going to be perhaps a little too strong? Let's talk about that today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So we are getting very close to Mornye's release. I myself am very excited, and I am expecting her to be quite the strong unit. Kuro Games is yet to officially reveal what her kit does, however there are a few hints here and there that allow us to infer what she's going to do, such as the 5-piece healing set that currently doesn't have a user in the game, that seems to suggest both attack buffing, potential extended healing or off-field healing, and something to do with Toon Break. Considering that we recently got Linny, this leads me to believe that Kuro Games has recently been focusing up on building a Toon Break core. And if you ask me, this character is shaping up to be an absolute S tier. I have glazed her numerous times, and I have said time and time again how no matter what position your Wuthering Waves account is in, you're going to be able to benefit from Mornye at least a little bit. At least a little bit. There is going to be some value in store, whether you're a free-to-play, a low spender, or whether you're a whale with a really decked-out account. This character is generally going to have value for basically every kind of player. Now, obviously, we're going to have to wait until Kuro officially reveals what her kit does to see if she's going to be any better or any worse than Shorekeeper, but things seem to be lining up in a way that would suggest that this is likely to end up being another universal third-slot teammate that is going to absolutely dominate the meta. However, this now begs the question. I have already mentioned numerous times how Mornye may potentially be an absolutely busted unit. This is something of which we are all aware, but this then begs, is she perhaps going to end up being too strong? And what do I mean by this? Well, we already have Shorekeeper and Verena, for instance. I personally believe Shorekeeper to be a whole lot stronger than Verena, so I'm going to focus mostly on Shorekeeper here, because Verena upgrades do exist for individual teams. But either way, focusing on Shorekeeper, she is a ridiculously strong character, and her mere existence single-handedly pulls down the value of most of her more niche third-slot teammates. Putting Shorekeeper in the back is genuinely an improvement for a vast majority of characters, not to mention that the majority of the cast is attack scaling, so if you pull for Shorekeeper S2, that is a universal upgrade to your entire Wuthering Waves account. This character has an insane reputation that absolutely precedes her. Shorekeeper basically needs no introduction to anybody that's been playing this game for longer than a month. I feel like anybody that has played at least a little bit of Wuthering Waves is fully aware of how strong this character is, and if they don't currently have her, they are currently seeking out to get her. She is just kind of that girl, and she deserves the glaze because she really is that strong. But the thing with Wuthering Waves is, it's not a game where you only need one team. It's a game where you need multiple, typically speaking, about 4 teams if you want to cover all endgames comfortably, and that is including the recent new endgame mode that they introduced. That endgame can actually demand up to 5 teams, but around 4 teams should be fine for an overall Wuthering Waves account, and it should help you cover most attribute resistances, assuming that each of the DPSs that you invest into or each of the teams that you invest into have a different attribute. And if you have one overlapping attribute, then you should at least have one team that isn't of that attribute to cover what would otherwise perhaps be a big counter to your account. So all around, in this game, you preferably want to have multiple different teams in order to cover all endgames comfortably. Generally speaking, most people are going to build at least 3 Wuthering Waves teams, at the very least, so that they can cover TOA. I add an extra team there because, well, like I said, resistances are a thing, and perhaps your middle team towers get countered. Because for side towers, yes, you generally can get away with using weaker teams, or teams that aren't fully equipped, just because side towers usually aren't as threatening. Though with the brand new endgame involved, there is an even stronger emphasis on having more teams. Now, one thing I will say is that in that endgame, universal supports like Shorekeeper and Verena have 2 charges, meaning that if you have exactly 4 teams, you're able to cover for all of those individual team comps. So Kuro did think ahead of time and did decide to include this to make your life easier when it comes to third-slot teammates. But there's the thing, is Mornye perhaps a bit too strong? Because we have Shorekeeper and Verena. Verena is definitively worse than Shorekeeper, and all around, she is universal, but there are usually better replacements that you can put in her place in specific teams that are going to be stronger than her, which then provides third-slot teammates some value, in a meta where they otherwise just aren't that valuable. Now, I will say no matter what, I am basically always going to advocate against pulling for them. For example, I just cannot see a singular timeline in which Roshia is a genuinely good and valuable Wuthering Waves investment. She is just not a good pull beyond any stretch of the imagination. I really encourage just never getting that character. She is not good whatsoever. But then take another niche investment like Chisa. Right now, I don't really think Chisa is that good of a character, but I do think that she's in slightly better of a position than Roshia currently is. Because at least with her, you can get away with playing Cardathea without Shakona by using Chisa. Now, is it going to be as strong as using Cardathea with Shakona? No, not at all, but at least it's an option that's there, and whenever we get more negative status characters in the future, it's likely that they're going to be designed with Chisa in mind. Now, I don't necessarily agree with Chisa mains that she's ever going to become super meta and an absolute must-pull, because I do believe that at the end of the day, these universal characters are going to negate the value of these third-slot teammates. And I think that brings us to the real crux of the issue. Is Mornye too strong, or is Kuro just too afraid to make third-slot teammates an actually valuable pull? Because this keeps happening time and time again. Anytime we get a brand new third-slot teammate 5-star, they're basically just not really that worth pulling for, and it's not like their meta prospects ever get that much better. Roshia had her 15 minutes of fame, but then she very quickly got replaced by Cho Yuen. And Chisa is a Cardathea upscale, just not one that's really worth investing into because Air Rover still gets the job done perfectly fine, and Chisa isn't even that drastic of an upgrade if you don't pull for her signature weapon. Kuro just has a really bad track record when it comes to these niche units. Now, I'll say with second slots, I still do believe them to be valuable, because all around we only have one Linny. She is the first of her kind. And with how many other teams you're likely going to want to build in this game, you're not really going to be able to just use Linny to cover absolutely everything. She only has one usage in the new endgame mode. She can only be used on one Whimpering Waste Staff, and in TOA, she can only be used in 2 middle tower chambers. So there you go, no matter what, you're gonna end up in a situation where you can use other second slot teammates, and I would say the only second slot that truly just isn't really worth getting anymore would be Counterella, because she's in a situation where if you have Linny, you would literally rather pull for Cho Yuen for Frolova. Cho Yuen is a more important pull to have a great Frolova than Counterella. Definitely the second slot that is currently in the worst position in the game at the minute, but in any case, characters like Shorekeeper and Mornye could probably be balanced out a lot easier if Kuro Games was more willing to make third slots more powerful, but the issue is, in doing so, they would be upscaling already really powerful characters. It was really hard to make Chisa balanced without her being just not very good or too strong, because ultimately, this is a character that would be buffing Cardathea, an already very good TOA DPS. Kuro just kinda had to be careful there. If they weren't careful enough, then they were accidentally going to make Cardathea ridiculously strong. So unfortunately, she was bottlenecked from the beginning. And someone like Roshia is an interesting case, because she actually started out as a second slot for Camellia. She just literally could not compete with Sanhua in any way, shape, or form because Sanhua's Concerto energy was just faster, and the only way that Roshia could realistically compete was by getting sequences, which at that point, you would rather just get Camellia sequences. Cho Yuen is probably the only third slot at the minute that's actually good, and he is a second slot. He was designed as a Galbraina second slot, but just so happens to be a really good Frolova third slot. So he accidentally ended up becoming a good third slot, which is very amusing, to be honest. But yeah, he accidentally ended up becoming a very good Frolova third slot. So not all third slots are bad, I suppose. There is Cho Yuen if you want to count him as one, but in my mind, he's a second slot. But the same thing did happen to Roshia, in fairness. She just kind of didn't survive. So I suppose he can be counted as both ultimately, because he does both things in the meta at least. But that kind of leads us back to the same issue. Kuro Games doesn't want to make third slots too strong, because then they're just going to upscale the units that they're supposed to be upscaling way too much. But then we end up in a situation where characters like Mornye are just infinitely more valuable of a pull than somebody like Chisa could ever hope to be. Not to mention that I personally expect Linny and Mornye to form a very strong core together. We'll obviously have to wait for Mornye's official release to see if that's going to be the case or not, but considering that the healing set does mention something in relation to off-tune, I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up being the case. Now, I'm personally quite happy that Mornye is going to be so strong, and I think it's great that we're getting such a valuable unit added to the game. I like it, I don't have an issue with it. I guess this more so just highlights how generally niche third slots are probably the most just not really worthwhile characters in the game at the minute, and they're in this really awkward position where Kuro is just too afraid to make them good. I understand their fear, but I feel like if you're going to make these types of teammates, and you want them to be actually valuable, you have to figure out a way to make them actually feel like they're worth going for, because at this point they basically never are. Lupa is the only example of a third slot that's like actually really freaking good that was intended to be released as a third slot. She can also be used as a second slot for DPS Brent Wuthering Waves. So I don't necessarily think that it's Mornye being too strong, as much as it's a situation where I feel like niche units just aren't really pulling their weight enough, and it makes Mornye look broken in comparison. They have to make a niche unit feel like, okay, this is actually more worth my time than using Shorekeeper, or Mornye, or Verena, or anything of the sort. So do I think Mornye is too strong? Well, we have to wait for her to come out and actually test her to see if that's going to be the case or not. I think it just seems like that she's perhaps quite strong because other third slots we get just aren't really good enough to make them seem like as good of a deal for specific accounts compared to somebody like Mornye. Lupa and Choyuwen are good, but Choyuwen was designed as a second slot and just ended up as a good third slot, which just goes to show how bad Roshia is. And then Lupa, yeah, okay, I can't say anything there, she's really good. But either way, hopefully this video is able to feed you some food for thought in regards to whether Mornye is too strong or not. This has been Juice, signing out, and you know what? Let's hope she is. I can't wait to use her myself.